Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today, I have someone who, I know that he probably would argue with me about this, but I think he's just one of the coolest people that ever lived on Earth because his name is Chris Cassidy. He's the president and CEO of the National Medal of Honor Museum, which is currently under construction, going to be opening in about 2 years. And he is a former Navy SEAL who then went on to become a NASA astronaut. And I know him pretty well. I know he's got some fabulous stories to share with us, but I mean, talk about a life, right? Navy SEAL, NASA astronaut, now president and CEO of the National Medal of Honor Museum. Chris, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks, John. And I'm just proud to be a good friend of John Bates.
Well, thank you. That's awesome. So, Chris, listen, gosh, there's so many of your stories that I know that I want you to share. Let's start with being a Navy SEAL, okay? Because that's, from the outside, that's fairly glamorous, right? I know it certainly takes something. And I remember asking you how you made it through Hell Week. Do you remember that conversation?
I do. Yeah, absolutely.
So I would love to hear that story. Do you mind telling us? How did you make it through Hell Week? And maybe explain what Hell Week is for people who aren't as familiar.
Exactly. So SEAL training is roughly 6 or 7 months long and broken up into 3 phases. The first phase is all about physical fitness and testing your fortitude. The second phase is diving. And the third phase is kind of land warfare and shooting stuff and blowing stuff up. And Hell Week is the 5th week of, I think, 7 or 8 weeks in first phase. So it starts on Sunday night and ends sometime on Friday. And you really don't know the exact start time or the exact end time. You just show up on Sunday and they tell you to prepare your gear and be ready at any moment. And at some point in the afternoon, the explosions start and smoke is everywhere and you find yourself just scurrying around. And it's a blur of activity, I'll tell you, John. And you're just kind of going. And you're riding through on adrenaline pretty hard for the first 24, 36 hours. And then somewhere in there, you just start to really get tired. And if you start thinking about the end at that point, like on Tuesday or even early Wednesday, you are just doomed. And the best advice I got was just make it to the next meal. And it didn't make sense to me when I started. Of course I'm going to make it to meal. But the fact of the matter is, it's super hard, but they have to let you eat. If you don't eat, you don't physically, your body won't have the energy or the calories just to make it to the next event. And so there's going to be breaks where no matter how chaotic it is, you're going to have 5 minutes or 15 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever they're feeling like that you need to put food in your mouth. And that was such fantastic advice. No matter how difficult it is, just do the one more push-up or the run to the next telephone pole to get yourself to lunch or to dinner or whatever. And you know what? Doesn't that apply to life too?
Absolutely.
You get through a tough, hard time and everybody has it. In fact, right now for me, we're trying to find a house in Dallas and we can't get settled and we feel crazy, but somehow we're going to just make it to the next meal. And the meal doesn't have to be literally to the next meal. It can be whatever time horizon you need, and you can kind of adjust that time horizon depending on the degree of difficulty. And that's what I learned in Hell Week. And you don't get through it alone. That we have this swim buddy concept in SEAL training where you're there, you're physically within 6 feet of your swim buddy at all times, and your buddy knows you super well. And if you start to have a little bit of hobble in your step, he can look at you and say, hey, come on, you need help? What do you need? And you're there for each other. And I think that's so important in life too,
I love that concept, and I wasn't as familiar with that aspect of Hell Week. And I remember I've done a lot of personal growth and development, and I did a great course. I really liked it, called the Landmark Forum. And that was all about you. That was all about me, looking at how I put together my personality, understanding these different facets of myself. And it was, of course, wildly fascinating because it was about me, right? For everybody, it was about us, me. So good course. But the advanced course, which comes after that, the fundamental premise of that is that if everyone in the course doesn't get it and get what they need out of the course, then nobody gets what they need. And it really had us focus on each other and helping each other through, which turns out to be the best way to make it through yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Love it.
That's fabulous. Well, and the other thing that I think is just so great about your journey, Chris, that I'd love for you to share with people is, it seems like without persistence and maybe a little bit of luck, but I think luck is self-created. You wouldn't have even made it into the Navy SEALs, much less the astronauts, right? I think there's two parallel stories there. Do you mind sharing those with us?
The bedrock story to that is the path to the Naval Academy for me.
Yes.
And
yes.
Later in life, I have grown to appreciate it more and more. But even at the time when I was 17 years old, I understood its impact. And I was just a normal kid growing up in a small town in Maine, and I knew I wanted to go to college. I was a decent student, not a fantastic student, and I was a decent athlete, but not the best. But I knew that college was something that I wanted to go to. And I don't know I think you probably remember, John, but you go to the guidance counselor's office back in the day and you thumb through this giant, thick book of schools and universities before the internet. And I was doing this process and putting yellow sticky notes in the book and circling different ones. And I came across the Naval Academy with these amazing looking buildings and sharp looking men and women marching in uniform. And my brother and my dad and we had always watched the Army Navy football game every December. So it kind of connected to me like, wow, okay, I get it. That place I think would be a great fit for me. And in that guidance counselor's book, in the fine print, it said it's free to go here. And I thought, oh, fantastic, even
price
better.
Right.
Yeah, the price is right. And I understood you had to be in the Navy after school, but I didn't really understand what being in the Navy meant. But I was fine with it. I'm like, okay, that's a small price to pay, and I think I'd be a good fit. And the book also said you had to apply to your congressman's office. So I did that. And I had nobody really guiding me. There was nobody from my family that had previously been in the military, and much less the service academy. So I applied to the congressman's office. I go from Maine to Augusta, Maine, which is the capital. And I'm in the office and did the interview. And the staff person came out and said, okay, good job, Chris. You did great. We got it from here. We'll get back to you. And I'm like, I'm done? Like nothing else needed? And she said, yep, we got it from here. So I go back. That's the fall of my senior year. You fast forward to the spring of that year when everybody's getting the thick or the thin envelope. Did you get in or not? Uh-huh. And I was getting information from other schools that I applied to, but nothing from the Naval Academy, not a peep. So at some point when I couldn't take it anymore, I picked up the phone and I called the admissions office, and the woman said, oh, okay, yeah. What's your name? And I tell her, and you hear her rummaging through files. What's your social security number? Rummaging through files. I'm sorry, we have nothing on you. You're not in our system. I'm like, oh, you're killing me. I can't believe it. And so I was pretty disappointed. But it just so happened, again, you say luck, and I think you're right. You make your own luck. But the next week was our spring break in my high school, and my friend's dad was taking a business trip from Maine to Washington, D.C., which is like 8-hour drive. And my buddy and I had planned to join his dad on this trip and do Washington, D.C. stuff for the week. And So I did this, and then one afternoon went over from Washington to Annapolis, which is about a 30-minute drive, and walked into the admissions office, and I recognized the voice of the woman now sitting before me. And she said, "Oh, you're the young man from Maine." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She's like, "Okay, you need to see Captain Melillo. He's the guy for New England. Down the hall, third door on the right. Can't miss him." So I marched down the hall, turned the corner, go to knock on the door, and bam! Standing before me is this stereotypical Marine, which I didn't know then what I know now, but like perfect uniform, high and tight hair, square jaw, shoes you can see your mirror reflection in, just like rigid as a board, perfectly fit. And my eyes, I could be like, oh my goodness, who's this human?
Yeah.
And
that's my dad, Chris.
That's your dad?
Yeah.
That's the guy. That's the guy I realized, even my naive brain, like, okay, I got to tell my story to him and maybe he can help. So I tell my story about what happened, and I could tell he's looking at me thinking, every other kid got their application in. And the reason is the academies you have to apply to the school and to your congressman. And I, because of poor knowledge and a little bit of no guidance, I didn't do the first part. I didn't apply to the academy. I just did the congressman's office and believed that they would send the information to the academy. So I had a little bit of misunderstanding of the process. Bad on me, really. But here I am trying to figure out the next steps. And he shakes his head and goes, okay, I got it. I was in his office for 4, 5, 6 minutes at the most. And he says, all right, I'll get back to you. I thought as I drove back to New England to like, well, at least I tried, but it's not going to happen. Well, the next week in school, the phone, I get paged to the main office and said, hey, Chris Cassidy, come for a phone call. The secretary answered me the phone and she said, somebody from the Navy. I get on the phone and it's him. He said, hey, it's Captain Melillo. I got good news. I can get you into the Naval Academy prep school, but I need an answer right now on the phone. Are you in or not? And I didn't know what the prep school was, where it was, what it meant, but I knew it was my opportunity. I said, yes, sir, I'm in. Thank you very much. And hung up the phone, and then learned later that it's a 1 year in Newport, Rhode Island. If you make good grades, you can automatically go to the academy. So it was a great fit. And I share this story because Captain Melillo, he owed me nothing. He knew nothing of me. Our lives were just a brief flash together. But if it wasn't for him, John, you and I would not be talking right now.
Yeah.
I would not be telling people about space experience, because without him, I wouldn't have gone to the academy. Without the Naval Academy, I would have not known what a SEAL was and certainly wouldn't have pursued that career. And because of the SEAL experiences, I believe I was a better applicant to become an astronaut. So it all circled back to the opportunity that he gave me. And I really think about that strongly now, as we're in positions of life where we can be that person for others, and I take that very seriously.
That's a fabulous thing to draw out of that, Chris. I love that. Was it Captain Melillo?
Yeah, Marine Corps Captain Melillo. Yep.
That's so awesome. So
you know what, John?
Yeah,
know my wife. You know my wife Peggy.
Yeah.
And she's heard me say this story so many times that she thought it would be cool to track him down. And unbeknownst to me, she did, and that's a whole story in and of itself. But she tracked him down, invited him to my pre-launch party that we had in Boston, which you were there.
I was there, and I got to see him.
You got to see. So I was telling that story. In fact, the day or two leading up to that party, Peggy was asking me, like, what are you going to say at the party? What are you going to say? And she never asked me that. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just going to thank the people for being there. She's like, no, you really should tell Captain Melillo's story. And so I tell the story, and she interrupts me and says, hey, Captain Melillo, will you please stand up? So I got to hug him, high-five him, and thank him in person 30 years later. It was such a special moment.
That's so beautiful. And I remember that. And thank you for inviting me, because that was the first time and only time that I've been to an actual launch party. I've been to a lot of launch parties for software, but never a launch party where someone was actually going to get on a rocket and truly launch. So and it was a blast to be there. And that's such a great story. I love it. And The other thing I love, Chris, is that that wasn't the only time that happened, right? Like, how did you become an astronaut? Like, isn't it a somewhat similar story?
Similar. I was not a young guy thinking about space flight. As I just talked to you, my path in the Navy, and then once I was in the Navy, I learned that you can become an astronaut through the military or other ways. And around that time, I met Bill Shepard, who was the first SEAL to become an astronaut. And talking with him, I learned about the process, how often you do it, what's a NASA office that you call. And I remember thinking, oh, my background is sort of lining up to be like Bill Shepard's. And if he was able to be a successful applicant, maybe there's a chance for me too. I don't know. Let's try.
Yeah.
And that's how that kind of worked out. I applied one time in 2000 and didn't get an interview and didn't get selected. And then 4 years later, 2004, I had completed graduate school. I had experience in Afghanistan, so I was just a better applicant, and I got selected.
Oh, but wait, you're skipping a part. I know.
Which
right?
part?
The part where you went and sat in the NASA office and you weren't even supposed to be there. And
yeah,
right?
So that you're right. I did skip that. I forgot. So in the application cycle in 2000, when I was not given an interview, I somehow figured out when the interviews were. So they bring a group of 20 people to NASA for a week, and it's a week of medical and actual interview, and I knew when it was. So I showed up on Monday morning of the final interview week and walked into it. Now, knowing what I know now, it's pretty comical, because there's like NASA can't process some extra person that just shows, sure, buddy, we'll take you.
Yeah.
Have a seat right here. Wait for we call your number. It's now serving number 21. But anyway, so I went to the admissions office and did that, and they politely told me, well, we appreciate your effort, but we can't accommodate you. And I flew back home. But they remembered.
And I got to imagine that that had some effect on the next time you applied. And I do think that the lesson I draw out of those two twin stories is just like, if you want it, go for it, man. Like, who cares that the congressman didn't call you back? Go to the school,
Yeah.
Go right to the Naval Academy and just show up there and see what you can do. And who cares that they didn't call you for your, for an interview for as an astronaut? Just go show up and be there anyway.
Yeah.
And even though they just sent you home, you were there, right?
Yep. And John, I think you'll agree with this, that nobody cares more about your success than you.
That's just absolutely true. And it can't be otherwise, right?
And it's not a selfish thing. It's not an egotistical thing to think about. And it doesn't mean that other people are not trying to help you. Like, if you call me and say, hey, Chris, I need your help, I'm all in. But at the end of the day, when push comes to shove, everybody's got their own pulling requirements, right, and yours are the most important to you.
Yeah. I mean, so I think another way to say it is there's nobody that's more responsible for your own success, right?
Than you.
And it's totally okay that you care about your success more than anybody else cares about your success, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's how it needs to be.
Yep. And just taking advantage and realizing that in-person contact, COVID aside, I'm just saying, face-to-face, letting somebody know who you are as an individual, I think is far better than just a piece of paper and a stack.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's an even more important message now than ever, because, it's so easy to just use electronic means and whatever, send your resume out to 1,000 places. And it's all just, none of that really humanizes it to go. But if you can go get in person and meet somebody or even meet them in a Zoom meeting, that's better than not,
Right.
that personalizing yourself in a situation where it matters to you. Right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So, Chris, what's a lesson that you learned from your time with the SEALs about communication, because I'll set it up a little more. One of the books I read that I thought was just one of the most interesting books I've ever read was, I think it's called Infantry in Combat. And it was basically the United States debrief of World War II, or World War One. And one of the big takeaways that I got from reading that book is, keep it simple and be ultra clear in your communications, because in the heat of battle, if you're not super clear, you're going to get misinterpreted and it's going to lead to bad outcomes. And I also really got the power of being focused on commander's intent, right? What is the intent of this action versus just what is the action, right? Like,
as you were setting up this question, I had commander's intent in my head, so I'm so glad you brought it up.
Great. So tell us about commander's intent from your point of view, Chris.
I think it's the best concept that there is, because you can dictate to people what you want them to do, but it never falls exactly. The cards don't fall out exactly how you do in the pre-planning, right? So what you need is people to understand, hey, this is what we're trying to achieve, and these are the risks we're willing to accept, and these ones we're not, and figure it out, get there. And at the Naval Academy, there's this famous story, which is take a message to Garcia. And I forget the exact story, but there's this gentleman that's given a note in Washington, D.C. and they say, take this message to Garcia. He's somewhere in South America. And it's this epic tale of him getting the letter to the commander in the field through any means, just figuring it out. They didn't spoon feed the answer to him. And that in a nutshell, I think, is the commander's intent concept, right? Like,
yeah.
We want this to be accomplished. We trust all of you as management and executors to just make it happen. And you touched on communication too, and I've come to realize that listening is the most important part about communicating. And it's just fascinating to me. Like, you can be a communicator and the receive function of your radio doesn't work. That doesn't make you a good communicator. You need the transmitter and the receiver to both be operational and be really take on board what you're hearing. And when you do that, you understand commander's intent, and then you're equipped as an individual and as a leader to make kind of nuanced decisions to get it done.
One of the places that I see this out there in just kind of normal life is at companies that either empower their customer service or don't empower their customer service, or companies that empower the person who's front line with the customers or not. And I think one of the big stories, and I don't know this story maybe as well as I should, but the basic idea is that for a long time, Home Depot would let their employees have a certain amount of money that they could use to keep the customer happy, right? And when they first implemented that, a lot of people were saying, oh, no, they're just going to use it to buy a drill themselves, right? They're going to use this money on themselves and whatever. But it turned out not to be true at all, right? That money was exceedingly well used over the whole of Home Depot with people that were on the floor with the customer, talking to them. They were unhappy about something. They could say, you know what, let me just handle this for you. Right. Mm-hmm. And that to me is a good place where you can tell how much the company, number one, understands the concept of commander's intent. And number two, how well they actually bring it to life with their own employees, right? I mean, one of the hard things about commander's intent for some leaders is it means you got to trust your people and let them make these decisions, right?
Yep. You have to just kind of let it go. And it kind of dovetails into the other thing I was thinking about as you're framing this question, that one of the key parts of leadership is followership.
Yeah.
And to be a good leader, you have to know when you can follow. And in the space station is a great example of that.
Yeah.
You know, you're up there for 6 months, and I was the commander of the space station, but you hand over the command to somebody else at some point. And so you see, to be a good teammate, you need to know when you can seamlessly flow between a role where you're in charge and then a role where you're supporting the person who is. And when everybody understands the commander's intent, it just kind of flows seamlessly. And it sounds easy as we describe it, but you know, it's tough. That's why we have podcasts and books and countless lectures about these leadership concepts.
Right. Right. You know, I mean, the other thing that I think's interesting about that is when I think of an organization that trusts, I mean, we could call each person in the organization a node. And if we're not running in that mode, then you've got the main processor, the leader, they're doing all of the thinking, they're doing all of the processing, and they're just telling the nodes to move around and telling them what to do. But if you bring commander's intent and this ability to trust each node of this network of an organization, it frees up a huge amount of processing power and brings a huge amount of processing power to the organization, because now these nodes are not just being moved around. They're actually processing and thinking and bringing their best and all of their knowledge in the moment. And they're the ones that are out there in the field actually doing the stuff. So they know best what the situation is on the ground. And it just frees up so much more. It just brings so much more processing power to the whole organization. Right.
I love it.
And so tell us a little bit more, like, you know, Chris, you've been to outer space and
I've been the guy in your background.
Yeah, that's right. There you go. I always think of you when I see this, by the way. You're reading my book. So I'd really like to dig into that for a few minutes, because I'd love to know what that experience was like and what that experience triggered for you and taught you. And, you know, just maybe we can talk about it first, just as a human being. What was that like? And then maybe you can tell us some of the leadership and communication lessons like you shared about being the commander of this, the ISS. But what was it like just as a human being for you that first time that you went to space?
So there I am, John. I'm about to, my hand's on the handle of the airlock hatch, and the pressure gauge just went from 1 atmosphere and is now on 0, and get the go to open the hatch. And I do just that. There's a little bit of stiction, last puff of air, open the hatch and it pops off the seal. And all of a sudden I see this thing go flying past the corner of my eye. And I didn't know it, but it was a piece of trash, a straw from a drink that had floated out of the trash can and somehow floated right there. And at that moment, it was right by my head. And the last puff of air sucked it out, and it went disappearing into the clouds below. And I was frozen watching this thing go, like, oh my God, I don't want to be that straw. I don't want to let it go. Because visually, your brain is still an Earth brain, and you look down and you see Earth below you 250 miles going past you at 5 miles a second. It's scary. It gets your attention, and you think you can tell yourself that you're going to fall. And then have this visual reference of this thing disappearing into nothing.
It looks like it's falling.
It looks like it's falling. It really wasn't falling. It just had a little bit of velocity from the last puff of air. And, you know, I remember I had received an email from Drew Feustel, another astronaut, before that launch. And he said in his email, just loosen your grip. And I didn't know what his email meant until that moment, because if you could have seen my hands, my knuckles were white. They would have ripped the metal out of the skin of the ship. So, and then you kind of get into the routine, and then you settle in and you feel comfortable and start to work. And so that was my initial moment, but of going outside. And first time I saw the Earth through the window of the space shuttle, just kind of took my breath away. I fundamentally think, John, that the world would be better if everybody had 5 minutes out that window.
Oh boy, I bet.
Every problem would be a little less important. People would puts things in perspective. You realize that Earth is a spaceship for 7 billion people, and you got to maintain, just like we have to maintain the International Space Station, you got to maintain Earth as a spaceship, take care of it, and not screw it up, and not leave it worse than you left it. That kind of thing is what really struck me and was the key takeaway from my experiences up there. I don't know where I was going with all that, but yeah.
Well, so two things come up for me from what you just said. One is I think it's Mike Massimino on Twitter. I saw a post a little while ago from him, and he said, I realized that I'm not actually afraid of heights. I'm afraid of gravity.
That's a great thing.
That's pretty funny, right?
Perfectly said. Mike's a funny guy. In fact,
he's a great dude. Yeah,
he's the funniest astronaut. Period. I think if you asked every astronaut who's the funniest astronaut, you'd get either him or Garrett Reisman. But together, they keep you in stitches. But he's so spot on there. I'm afraid of gravity is the thing that makes the heights scary.
Right. Yeah. Without gravity, heights aren't scary, right?
Yeah.
But that straw shooting out gave you the visual illusion of gravity pulling it towards Earth, and freaking terrifying, right?
Exactly.
That's really funny. Well, and then the other thing is, because I've worked with you and Karen, and got to meet all the active astronauts back in the end of 2017, I've thought a lot about that idea of the overview effect, right? Which is kind of what you're pointing to. If everybody could just have 5 minutes looking out that window on the space station and seeing the Earth there, it would just change us, right? I think everybody that I've talked to who's experienced that said it changed me. And one of the things that as I mentally put myself in that position, but still feel gravity, it seems to me like one of the big things is that idea of, right, the Earth is a spaceship, and there is nothing anywhere close at all that's going to come to our rescue if we mess it up, right? This talking about finding another home for humanity, we are a long ways from that, right? And even if we did find another Earth orbiting another sun, it's only going to be how many light years away, right? I mean, and probably top speed in the universe is the speed of light, right? It's going to be very difficult to go faster than that. So it would, even at the speed of light, it would still take years, right? And when we think about all the energy it takes to just lift a few humans off of the Earth, it's not going to be a large migration anytime soon.
Right.
I just, tell me about the colors and the blackness.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So what strikes you when we do spend time looking out at the blackness, but it's always interesting to me that our eyes gravitate back to Earth.
Gravitate.
That's our home, and that's where we're interested in seeing, and we can study it, and it's the closest celestial body to where the space station is. And so you have the deep, deep, deep black of space. You've got these little dots all around the stars. You can still see them. The moon is relatively the same size. It looks generally the same. You can see it more crisply because you're not looking through the atmosphere.
Yeah.
But what you notice when you look at the intersection of this black space and the edge of Earth, you see this bright blue layer that is the atmosphere. And I always think of that as the hull of our ship. On the space station, we've got metal walls that keep the pressure in, and every now and then it gets hit by a little piece of space debris, and you can see indentations, small ones, really small ones, but indentations where specks of dust or whatever have hit. And
specks of dust moving really fast,
really super fast, and some bang into you, and that we that are able to track some particles of down to a certain size, and if they're expected to get sort of close to the space station, we'll maneuver the space station to avoid or lower the probability of getting hit, because you can never exactly pinpoint where it's going to be and where you're going to be. So you're really dealing with probabilities of collision. And that atmosphere represents the thing that's keeping us alive. And it's really, I just love looking at that edge of blackness of space and the edge of Earth. It's really cool.
And I've heard that the ratio is approximately like the skin of an apple to an apple.
Yep, me too. I've heard that same analogy. I'm not smart enough to know exactly the dimensions and the ratios, but that does help visually put it in perspective of just how skinny are we talking about.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a lot of it, and we got to be really careful with it.
Yeah.
Well, so what else what else has kind of run through your mind here, especially around the topic of leadership and communication? Is there anything that comes up around your new position as the CEO of the National Medal of Honor Museum? What are you finding in this new position? Because this is totally different than everything else. Yeah.
Totally different. I've been in the role for about 9 months that I've been out of the government, retired from the Navy and NASA. And, as I reflect back, the SEAL teams in NASA, although the missions were different, they're fundamentally in the same, in that it was a small group of people trying to accomplish a risky mission and do it safely and effectively with the support of a whole team of people.
An enormous team
of people. And the theme there is people. And when I got to this new job, the mission's totally different. We're fundraising, we're building construction, constructing and building a museum, something completely different than I've ever been involved with. But guess what? Who's doing it? People.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah.
And I realized that it doesn't matter what your organization is. It doesn't matter what your mission is. It doesn't matter what you're trying to accomplish in a day. You and your colleagues are people, and you're doing a thing, and you need to unite and come together, have commander's intent, have good communication, have good teamwork, not be jerks to each other, and be people together to get it done. And so that's the one thing I learned, John, thinking that there was going to be some magic difference between a civilian life and a government person or military person. And the uniform's different. The jargon that we use and the acronyms we use are different. But at the end of the day, it's just people making it go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love that because it's just so true. And, and Chris, I do a lot of work with veterans that are transitioning out of the military into civilian life. And one of the things that I always tell them, and I'd like to tell you this now and have you, let it sink in and maybe share it with other veterans that you know. But one of the things that I love about working with veterans is that you know how to do something as if your life depends on it. And
more accurately, as if your buddy's life depends on it.
Even better, right? Even better. And that's something that is so powerful, no matter where you go, no matter what you're doing. And look, you just demonstrated the real beauty of what I think veterans get out of being in the military. It's not about your life. It's about your buddy's life. That awareness and consciousness of others on the team is something that I am constantly just gobsmacked by in the most positive of ways by veterans. And So, so know that you have that, and know that that's something that the civilian world really hungers for, and not only needs from you, but would love to be taught by you in different ways and in different areas. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm super glad you're doing this. Tell us a little bit about what you're up to accomplishing there at the National Medal of Honor Museum. And I got to believe it's bringing greater awareness and sharing the stories of the Medal of Honor recipients. But
Yeah.
tell me more in your words. What are you guys doing there?
Yeah, so there exists so the Congressional Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor on the battlefield. There exists smaller regional or hometown museums for Medal of Honor recipients, but not a national museum. And so this is the effort to make that right. But our goal is not just to construct a museum, it's to inspire people through these amazing stories of courage and sacrifice and bravery and patriotism. In an effort with the museum, also part of housed in the museum will be a leadership institute where we'll have programmatic content, multi-day, short day programs, symposiums. We're putting all that together. And then a character development piece for K through 12. As well as the adult portion. So all that's kind of coming to life now. In fact, the first program for adults will be the first week in November.
Wow.
We realize we don't need to have the building built to start getting this out there. So when you walk, the museum is it's an amazing piece of architecture. It'll be a really symbolic building. When you go up into the gallery, it's tough. There's been 3,511 recipients since Abraham Lincoln put the award into place. There's 64 of them living today. In this box, we can't display 3,500 stories, and no visitor can take that in.
Yeah.
So we can have about 50 recipients and their stories displayed on a permanent place. We'll have digital means where you can dig into any of the 3,500 that you want to, and then rotational gallery where we can change it up based on what we want to highlight in that year or that month or whatever. But at the end of the day, we're aiming for somebody to come through and connect in some way with a story or two stories, or be able to connect and say, oh well, I'm from Tennessee also, or I played soccer as a kid, or I went to that same middle school, or whatever it is, and be inspired, because not every person is good. I mean, very few people are in the percentage are in the military, let alone have the opportunity to be on the battlefield and display courage in that way. But what I've come to realize in this job is courage there's opportunities for that in all aspects of our life. It takes courage to have a tough conversation with your boss or your teenage kid. It takes courage to, be an engineer at NASA and be looking at data that says we shouldn't launch today. And my vote, sir, is scrub this mission. And that takes a tremendous amount of courage. So courage on the battlefield, although it's not exactly the same, you can demonstrate it in other aspects of life, and we hope that that's what this museum will do.
Well, Chris, that's one of my favorite topics is courage, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, and then we'll wrap it up. I know we're coming up on our time, but I remember, I have this cover, I have this magazine that Harvard put out called Fearless Public Speaking. And I take great issue with that title because my dad, the combat Marine, a lot like Captain Melillo, he taught me early on, son, you do not want a fearless foxhole buddy. Yeah. That guy will get you killed, right? That's not what you want. A courageous foxhole buddy, someone who has their fear, but will take action anyway when it's warranted. Right. And I think that so many times people think they should be fearless, right? And that's number one, that's totally stupid. It'll get you killed. And number two, it's not at all inspiring. What's truly inspiring and what's really going on, I think most of the time with functional human beings is not fearless, it's courage.
Mm. Yep. And I've come to think also that fear comes from uncertainty and unknown, and you can keep fear in check and keep it managed and understand when you need to, when it's smart to go forward. And what, back to the concept that you're talking about, you don't want fearless. That leads to stupid decisions. You want courage, and that courage is weighed, risk versus reward. And does it make sense today to run out and grab, something out of the highway? Probably not. But if you see a baby crawling on the highway, now all of a sudden it's way more important to run out onto that highway. And, I just love that concept, John, of you want a courageous foxhole buddy and not a fearless one. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thanks. I know you had a blast doing it, and I know that you made sacrifices, and they were sacrifices in service of us. And so thank you for your service and for your sacrifice. And I'm also glad that you're well and you had a good time. And I really appreciate you taking the time with me today to talk with us and share yourself and share your stories. It's such a blast. And I'm so glad to just see you again and get to hang out for a little bit.
Likewise, it's always a pleasure, and feel like we could fill up several hours with this stuff, you and I could.
Well, I'm going to ask you to come back again at some point, right?
Absolutely. I love it. I'm happy to.
Good. And, I'll put links to the National Medal of Honor Museum in the show notes, and I'm going to ask you to send me any other notes, any other links to things that you'd like people to be aware of. Anything you want to say before we go? I know we got to run.
No, John, I never thought when I set out in the beginning of life, I never thought I would be a SEAL and astronaut. It's just all stuff that happened. Life is so interesting with opportunities, you take them and you got to do your part and deliver. But, it's all about mentors and opportunities and just appreciate all of it. So anyways, I don't know what I'm saying. Just glad to be with you. Glad you're my friend, and look forward to the next time.
Likewise, my friend. Likewise. Great to have you. And thanks to all of you listening. We appreciate you joining us here on speaklikealeader.show. If you don't mind taking a minute to give us a 5-star review, that would help us get the word out and share this with even more people. And I look forward to hearing you next time. And thanks again, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.